This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Republican Leader Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor during the 2024 lame duck session of the 118th Congress. On December 17th, Schumer discussed ongoing negotiations on a continuing resolution to avoid a shutdown on the 20th, what he calls a glide path to passage of the annual defense bill, federal coordination on artificial intelligence and drone detection. He then offered tribute to Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown after his re-election loss. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, negotiations continue between both parties on a temporary extension of government funding. There continues to be good progress, but appropriators are still working on finalizing an agreement. Obviously, we're getting closer to the December 20th deadline, so time is of the essence for Republicans to reach an agreement with us that we can act on quickly. Democrats will continue working in good faith with our Republican counterparts on a strong CR that will prevent a shutdown while also delivering critical disaster relief for the American people. On the NDAA, last night the Senate voted to advance the NDAA by a strong margin of 83-12. The NDAA is now on a glide path to final passage. Everyone knows this NDAA is not perfect, but it still takes a strong stand against the Chinese Communist Party. These are things that I've pushed very hard for. It boosts the use of AI for our national defense, another thing I care a lot about, and expands tech innovation programs for communities across the country, a third thing that is very, very important and good. It has many good things Democrats fought hard for. I'm gratified it has all these: the Chinese Communist Party, the use of AI for national defense, and expanding tech innovation. Of course, it has some bad provisions that we Democrats would not have added, and other provisions that we would want left out entirely. I'm particularly glad that this year's NDAA expands the Tech Hub program I created with Senators Young, Cantwell, and others in the Bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act. These funds will transform communities in upstate New York, the Midwest, and across the country into the next epicenters of innovation. It also includes bipartisan measures on AI to expand our AI infrastructure and strengthen America's edge against the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, in this critical technology, so important to our national security and to the U.S.'s technological leadership. I thank my colleagues for both sides for their good work on the NDAA, especially Chairman Reed and Ranking Member Wicker. We hope to send the NDAA on the way to the President's desk as soon as possible. On drones, this afternoon I will come to the Senate floor to stand with Senator Peters to pass legislation I've co-sponsored to respond to the recent reports of unusual drone activity. The FBI, DHS, and DOD, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Defense support this bill. Our legislation will explicitly authorize state and local authorities to conduct drone detection and help them better coordinate with federal law enforcement. With the multiplicity of drone sightings and so many drones in the area, many harmless for recreational use, but many that there are still many questions about, federal authorities agree that they can't respond to these incidents alone, and they need help from local authorities. But unfortunately, the local authorities do not have the authority right now. It's only in the domain of the federal government. For all we know, the recent drone incidents are for the most part, or maybe all part, benign. But even so, in some cases they can be disruptive, like when they impact airport operations or approach bases. And people are understandably anxious about seeing things in the night sky without clear answers to what is going on. The people in New York and New Jersey have a lot of questions, still haven't gotten answers from the feds. The worst part is that right now, local officials have very little in terms of resources and oversight authority to do anything about these incidents. So this afternoon, I will join Senator Peters to try and fix that, and I thank my friend from Michigan for his good work on this bill. Finally, Mr. President, on Senator Brown's retirement. This afternoon, a beloved colleague of ours will deliver his farewell address, my dear friend, Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. If there's one statement that captures Sherrod Brown best, it is this: Workers look at Sherrod and say, he is one of us. Workers look at Sherrod and say, he is one of us. Now, elected office wasn't part of the Brown family tradition, but fighting for justice certainly was. Sherrod says, and he said it many times, I've seen that smile on his face when he says it, he says he inherited his activist bent from his mother, a Georgia native who marched on the front lines of the early civil rights movement. Sherrod's mom taught him and his brother Charlie, who I went to law school with, I knew Charlie before I knew Sherrod, the power of political activism and the moral duty we all have to serve our neighbors. Sherrod got the message early. His first taste of politics came in high school when he was elected president of the student council. Right away, he became a proud thorn in the side of the principal, organizing anti-Vietnam War protests and pushing for racial equality in the educational system. During his senior year in college, Sherrod was recruited to run for state rep. Admittedly, his parents weren't thrilled about his decision. In fact, his dad told him, with a little tough love, "I will not be voting for you. You are too young." Do you think Sherrod listened? Would anyone who knows Sherrod today think he listened? Of course not. He didn't listen. He won in a stunning upset, also typical of Sherrod. So at 21, he became a state rep. During those years, he would spend his Fridays not at home, but at the local union hall in Mansfield, Ohio, United Steelworkers 169. He did nothing but listen. He listened to the workers who dropped by before their shift. He listened to them talk about their jobs, their families, their kids, about the union. They'd keep up with the latest news. They'd keep him abreast of the latest news about strikes and reminisce about heroes in the labor movement. They'd talk literature together, Grapes of Wrath, Joe Hill, that depicted the struggle of American workers and the relentless drive to achieve the American dream. Those Fridays at the union reshaped Sherrod's worldview forever. They taught Sherrod one of the great truths about America. Our country was built up from the middle class, and the middle class was built by unions and union workers. My family knows the same thing. Everything Sherrod did in politics from then onward was in service to this truth. So when he came to Congress many years later, it's no surprise that one of his very first votes was opposing NAFTA, fearful of the devastating consequence it would have for Ohioans. Decades later, he brought back to Ohio. He has brought back jobs to Ohio, helping break ground on some of the largest manufacturing projects in the state's history through the CHIPS and Science Act. And we made sure, Sherrod and I and some others together, that it will be done through union labor. I insisted on that in the CHIPS and Science Act, and Sherrod was in my ear making sure that happened all the time. Years before we passed the ACA, Sherrod was also one of the leading proponents for health care reform and expanding access. He famously refused to get health insurance on his own as a congressman and senator until the day we passed the ACA. On infrastructure, Sherrod was the relentless force behind the Buy America provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, ensuring that America's roads and bridges and highways were built from American-made steel and iron and concrete. On pension reform, this is something we so much cared about. Sherrod was the author and champion of the Butch-Lewis Act, putting money back in the pockets of retirees who faced the unthinkable prospect of seeing the benefits dry up. And it was so typical of Sherrod. It wasn't an abstract idea for him. He knew the Lewis family, and they came here and lobbied. It was all about people, and then working out from people how you could make their lives better and America better. The record goes on. Sherrod's a leader for Wall Street reform, saving U.S. auto jobs, lowering prescription drug prices, protecting the right to organize at work, investing in apprenticeship programs, expanding the child tax credit, protecting workers on the job, and so much more. It's amazing. Amazing what he did. He was here 18 years, and amazing what he accomplished for working people. It's a record that anyone would be very, very proud of, and we are also proud of Sherrod's record. The common theme to all this is a phrase Sherrod has embraced in his entire life: the dignity of work. It's something he repeats again and again. He's even named his bus tours on it. And he also talks about the canary in the coal mine, that when there's some bad signs coming from certain places about working people, we better all listen, because it's the canary in the coal mine. I think he wore a canary in the coal mine on his blazer every so often. Finally, let me end at the beginning with a quick and humorous moment from Sherrod's youth. As a high school senior, Sherrod one day got together with his friends Paul and John to organize a rally in Mansfield to honor the very first Earth Day in 1970. This is what he did. He organized rallies. Some people went to ball games. Some people watched TV. Some people went out to restaurants. Sherrod organized rallies. They expected a good turnout at this rally, but they didn't expect 1,000 people to descend on downtown Mansfield, which wasn't that big a city. As Sherrod described it, we did this really cool march, and we had really big crowds. But when we got down to the square, and none of us had thought about what you do when you get down there. We didn't have any speakers, and so we said, oh, shoot, and we just disbanded. Now, he wouldn't do, only in Sherrod's account, he didn't use the word shoot. Isn't that a vintage Sherrod story? And he never made that mistake again. He was the speaker at so many of the rallies. You know, I knew he'd be a great senator. And when at first he decided not to run, he was a House member in 2006. I spent a lot of time in the House gym, and we spent time on the bikes next to each other, panting and sweating, but also my convincing him that with his great talent and his great passion for workers, he was so needed in the Senate. I'm so glad he decided to run, because he has done so much and left such an amazing imprint on this body. So, the story Sherrod accounts for with his rally in Mansfield has always been who he has been: direct, unflinching, passionate. A man who is warm and welcoming down to his very core, yet rough around the edges in just the right way. A man who will shun a tailor Italian-made suit in favor of the Cleveland shop just a few miles from his home. A man who can penetrate the dense language of public policy, but will always prefer to ponder a line from the scripture, from Tolstoy, Martin Luther King, or a worker from who he heard something. A man with a gifted mind, and he has such a gifted mind, but this is a true compliment, an even more gifted heart. Thank you, Sherrod, for everything. We wish you, Connie, and your entire family our very best. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
McConnell continued a series of thanks to staff, on this occasion to his longtime Deputy Chief of Operations.
For many years running, a familiar morning ritual has played out just a few steps from my desk here in the Capitol. A lamp turns on, illuminating a shelf where an embroidered pillow reads, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." Invariably, a cold Diet Coke is cracked open, perhaps a moment of reflection on Peggy Noonan's timeless observation that the constant possibility of quiet revenge keeps one peppy. Then my Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Seb Muckle, opens her office for business. Seb works at a busy crossroads. Just about everything time-sensitive, confidential, or otherwise important that's headed in my way stops at her desk first, and that's by design. There's no one else who could spend and accumulate institutional capital in my name with Steph's competence. No one else who commands such a comprehensive awareness of my interests and priorities. No one else who embraces other duties as assigned with her unwavering devotion. Now, this might sound like the sort of high praise any one of our colleagues would hope to give to a close advisor of 2 decades. I'm sure it's what each of them would want to say about a bright, instinctive, effusively patriotic staffer who finished college a year and a half early and poured herself into public service at the highest level. I don't doubt that each of our colleagues is fortunate to enjoy the fierce loyalty of their staff, but I'm quite certain I'm the only one in the Senate who's been blessed by the fierce loyalty of staff. There's no portfolio, or more accurately, no collection of portfolios anywhere in Washington quite like the one I've handed to Steph. And that makes sense because there's no one else who could handle it quite like her. Around my office, the bench in Steph's office is where colleagues come for guidance and gut checks. Across the entire Senate, any number of people can think of times when it was Steph's wisdom, discretion, candor, loyalty, diplomacy, tact, or political savvy that made all the difference. I can think of hundreds. No one else sees the whole board, from policy objectives to political considerations to protocol sensitivities to personal circumstances like Steph does. That may have something to do with the fact that she's seen my Senate office operations from just about every vantage point over the years. For Steph, there's been no task too small, no job that wasn't worth doing right. And as it turns out, this approach has been contagious. Steph's role so often demands uncompromising efficiency and the utmost discretion. And yet she still seems to seize every opportunity to bring the MAC team closer together as family. Of course, Steph's other duties, as assigned, include covering much larger groups than the professionals I'm proud to call my staff. In every corner of the building, her name is synonymous with mastery of the ceremonial protocols that transform the Capitol into a national stage. This is the place where America inaugurates our presidents, bids farewell to fallen heroes, and bestows our highest honors. And very little of it takes place without Steph's knowledge, input, orchestration, or blessing. When you think about it, this diplomatic grace and eye for detail makes sense, coming from someone who probably hasn't missed a British royal wedding or an Olympic opening ceremony in her entire life. Don't worry, Steph cheers for Team USA, loud and proud. But I'd be remiss in talking about grace without mentioning the ways she's shown it in the face of the most demanding challenges we've seen together. When the pandemic arrived, Steph's ability to balance sensitive considerations and competing interests was invaluable, not just to me, but to the entire Senate. Her approach to big, thorny questions about protecting senators and staff while upholding our duties helped us make the right calls when there were any number of ways to make the wrong ones. In truly uncharted territory, Steph's poise was decisive. As leaders across the institution faced a blank page and a daunting once-in-a-century task, she took action. Not because it would be easy, but because it had to be done. For years, this has been something of a theme. It had to be done, had to be Steph. Had to be airtight and discreet, had to be Steph. had to navigate political and personal sensitivities just right, had to be Steph. In this job, it's important to have a few people around you who really do know every aspect of your life, who you can trust without question, who will guard your confidences, and who will give you honest feedback. I'm tremendously fortunate and proud of the countless ways Steph rises to these responsibilities over and over again. But I'm hardly the only one who gets to take pride in what Steph's accomplishment. I share that distinction with the family who makes Steph who she is today, with her parents, Gary and Diane, her sisters, Abby and Leslie, and with the ones she rushes home to when the immense demands of the Senate grant a brief respite, her husband, Scott, and their beloved daughter, Lily. I'm not sure my words here can ever begin to capture the significance of the first and last person I speak to every day, but there's perhaps no better illustration of Steph's love for our country and for the Senate than her sacrifice of times with the ones she loves the most. So, Steph, I'm so grateful to you for everything you've done, both for the Senate and for me.
Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided for informational and educational purposes only, with all rights reserved. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without explicit permission from FedNet is prohibited. See you next gavel.